Greetings. This is TimeRider. Truly in Chapter 4. Yesterday was the first official day of my retirement. I don't know if I mentioned it, but for 28 years I worked in a municipal police department. No, I wasn't a cop. I don't even own a gun. What I did for the police department, largely, was maintain their vehicle fleet. So I guess you could say I know a thing or two about squad cars. Which leads me to the restoration that I'm going to do for you today. It's the Matchbox number 55C, which is a white Ford Galaxie 500 police vehicle. It was produced from 1966 until 1971, when it was replaced by a Mercury version of the white police car. This was one of the first Matchbox cars I ever purchased, and I actually paid a little over $7 for it. The wheels were rusty and chipped up, the body was chipped up. It wasn't in very good condition, but I really wanted to do a police car, and it was the first one that I found. I've subsequently purchased others for much less, in lots that I've purchased. But anyway, let's get on with it. It's pretty typical at this point. I'm going to drill out the posts and get the glass out of it. Having done that, the axles were really rusty, so I decided to just cut them, and I'm going to replace them with the tubes and end caps that I bought in that kit. Once I had it apart, I wanted to do a little bit of an assessment. The body itself looked like it was structurally sound, in pretty good shape. The little spring, of course, had been flattened after 50 years of use. That could be dealt with. The interior was dirty, at least the little police officer was still there. The chassis, aside from being really corroded, had a crack in it, right by one of the front wheels. It probably got stepped on. That would be my guess. The reason that I say that is the windscreen had a crack in it. The wheels were in just awful condition. And the axles, of course, were really rusty. So now it was time to move forward and drill out the posts and tap some holes so I could put the whole thing back together with button screws when I was all done. Paint removal went about as expected. Paint came off fairly easily with citrus stripper. Of course, it's always important for you to know where you are and where you need to be. After I got the paint off and I started picking away at the little bits of paint that were left, I noticed that when it was stepped on, the body had been damaged. The A pillar and the B pillar on the right side of the body were not straight any longer. It was really apparent on the B pillar. So I was going to have to address that. My solution was to take a punch, and on the heel end where you would normally strike it with a hammer, I was going to use it like a dowel and just gently press on the pillars to try to get them straight. I didn't want to use a needle nose. I didn't think that would work, and I thought that there might be a chance that I would break them if I started bending. And if you've ever tried to bend something with a needle nose, a thin something like these are, a lot of times you wind up getting them even more bent than they were to begin with. This wound up working pretty well, and in the end everything looked straight. I figured as long as I was straightening things, I might as well address that chassis problem right away. And here I just took the punch and I put the chassis in the vise. And I just tapped it lightly. All I wanted to do was close that crack off a little bit. I'm kind of living out in the sticks now, and I went to the local supermarket and they didn't have any lime away or lime out, but they had this product which was called Krud Kutter. Basically the same thing, mild acid designed to remove calcium and lime and rust. So I took about a 50-50 mix of Krud Kutter and water, and I dropped the chassis in for 4 minutes. Get rid of some of the ickiness. And while I was waiting for that, I figured it was time to prime the body. I'm using, as usual, Tamiya Light Gray. I'm pretty happy with the Tamiya product. I know I've probably said that way too many times, but it just retains the details of the casting so well. Once I was done with the Krud Kutter, I wanted to address the cracks in the chassis. If you're wondering, I'm putting the tape down just because I just bought this really nice mat, cutting mat, and I don't want to wreck it. And I noticed that both sides were actually a little cracked. So what I did was basically I put a drop of super glue in each crack and sprinkled some baking soda on it to make that hard compound that works so well on this kind of thing. And at that, it was time to give all the plastic pieces a little bit of a bath. In the past, I had kind of waved these things over a candle to straighten them out, but one of my subscribers suggested that I use boiling water, so I actually placed it in boiling water for 30 seconds and then flexed it in the opposite direction while running it under cold water, and it actually straightened it out and even went a little bit in the other direction very nicely. Now, something that I've learned somewhere along the way, you can see the crack there. And my fear, of course, was that the crack would extend down into the windshield at some point. So what you need to do in order to resolve this kind of a problem is you need to terminate the crack. And fortunately, the crack ended before it got to the actual windshield. So I took my Dremel and put a drill bit in it. I didn't want to use my drill because it just goes too fast. And I drilled a hole at the end of the crack. And then I took some Tamiya liquid glue used for models, hopefully to try to seal the crack up a little bit. I wanted to clean up the little red beacon for the top of the vehicle, so it had like a ring around it probably from being scraped against the metal of the body. So I started with a file and worked my way down the series of sandpaper until I got down to 3000 grit, at which point it looked really nice. I didn't have any really good footage of this, partly because it's so small it's hard to get it in focus. I considered the wheels to be something of a lost cause, but I had this older Mercedes ambulance that was just too far gone to ever hope for restoration, so I stole a couple of wheels off of that and took a couple off of the Ford Galaxie that weren't too bad, cleaned them up with some soapy water, and then used Marty's Matchbox Makeovers tire wash to sort of bring them back to life a little bit. I actually learned kind of a long time ago that white isn't necessarily white. There's a lot of different hues of white. In this case, though, I figured just straight up X2 Tamiya white would be sufficient. I wasn't going to try to figure out a way to mix the proper white, so I took a couple of passes at it and did 2 coats. The one thing about painting white is, especially when you're using an airbrush very low PSI, it's tough sometimes to see if you're actually laying the paint on it or not. But after a couple of coats, it was just a matter of making sure that certain areas got hit, like inside the wheel wells. I wanted to do the inside of the car, so I made sure that I hit that. White is a really tough color to work with because you can't really see when you're painting the second coat on which areas you've hit and which areas you haven't. So here it's time for some assembly. I went ahead and put the wheels on using the little axle kits. This video was getting kind of long, and maybe I'll do another one at some point if you don't understand how they work, but it was time to put the whole thing together. And so now let's take a brief look back at where I started. Rusty, corroded wheels, some of them chipped up, some of them wouldn't rotate, crack on the chassis, more ugly wheels. You can kind of see the bent A and B pillars a little bit in this particular segment. And so here you have it. The final end product. The Matchbox 55C 1965 Galaxie police car. This is TimeRider at Chapter 4. Thanks for watching. Click the little bell if you want to subscribe. And please feel free to make any comments below. Have a good night.